When you hear of the secret space program, what does that mean? How do they keep it from us? Is it based off UFO technology? Or is it the seeking of UFO technology? Well, today we have producer director Darcy Weir on the show talking about his documentary, Secret Space UFOs Rise of the TR-3B. And joining him, we have Jim Goodall, who is a living legend in the field of aeronautics, aviation, and all things military. Well, I'm Tony Sweet with Truth Be Told. We have a great conversation today with producer-director Darcy Weir and the amazing Jim Goodall. There he is. There's Jim. How you doing, Jim?
I live in shoveling snow. It does snow in southern Arizona every once in a while, but not lately.
well, I'm excited to have you here. Darcy is, I think the Men in Black have found him and took him off to an undisclosed location, but hopefully he'll be here soon. But we have so many questions about this documentary and your involvement, and then just knowing a little bit more about the secret space program. So first of all, I want to find out, how were you sought after for this documentary?
Well, I'm just sort of a jack of all trades when it comes to spooky airplanes. I'm intimately familiar with most everything that's going on at the Skunk Works, at least as a historical point of view. My 27th book, when it came out last June, was 75 Years of the Lucky Skunk Works, where I cover 43 programs, some of which have never seen the light of day. And of the almost 700 plus photos, about half of them have never been in print. So that's what I do. I've been going out to the fence line at Area 51 since the late 80s. I was one of the very first persons to, in fact, I was the very first civilian to photograph the F-117 at the fence line at Tonopah Test Range. And I guess my claim to fame when it comes to go bump in the night is the fact that I knew Bob Lazar before he went to work out in the desert, and you couldn't put a gun to his head to convince him that UFOs were real. So that's where we're at.
Well, in fact, you were telling me the picture behind you is Area 51. You said at 1 o'clock in the morning?
Yeah, 1 o'clock in the morning. It was 21 degrees. This is December 12th, 1993. And you can see water on the lake.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it was 1 o'clock in the morning, and the whole place is lit up. So they fly and do the real spooky stuff on long weekends is their preference, and or at night, when most everybody has left and gone home from Area 51, except for the special spooky guys who are working on something he doesn't want the rest of the world to know about.
Well, let me ask you this. You know, Area 51 we've heard about for so many different years. I mean, we've heard about this location, and even movies have, talked about Independence Day, and many other movies have talked about how Area 51 holds aliens and UFO craft and secret technology. But do you feel now it's still significant because there's so much press about it? Do you feel that they still have that stuff, technology and stuff there, or do you think they've moved it to a different location? Is it now more just a novelty?
The Area 51 was put together by Kelly Johnson and his crew back in 1955 when they were looking for a place to flight test the U-2 spy plane. They wanted a place that was away from airline tracks, going from East Coast to West Coast, and away from where the general public could accidentally see something. So what what they did, Darcy Cameron and Tony LeVere, they were in a twin beach. They went out flying around the desert, the whole entire desert Southwest, looking for a suitable place. And they found this dry lake bed in the middle of nowhere, just to the northeast side of the Nevada test site. And they figured this was a great place. So they flew back to Burbank. They told Kelly Johnson, the founder of the Skunk Works, what they had found. So they flew Kelly out there, and they landed on the lake bed. And Kelly looked around and says, "This place is too remote." As it turns out, it was their best guess. So they started in 1955. They started moving equipment down. They moved three big hangars down from Hawthorne, Nevada.
Right.
They dismantled them, trucked them down, and those are the big three primary hangars. And then they built the hangars for the U-2s. And those hangars are now part of the National Historical buildings. They can't be destroyed or altered from this point forward. And so it's been a location that's been off the beaten path forever. It really got put on the roadmap, if you want to call it that, when Bob Lazar finally decided he was going to talk to George Knapp about doing reverse engineering on alien spacecraft. But the thing about Bob, I knew him before he went to work out in the desert, and you couldn't put a gun to his head to convince him that UFOs were real. And it was just sort of a funny way I met him. I was with John Weir, the infamous John Weir.
Right.
His dad brought Learjet to the world. And this is January of '89. They had announced the existence of the B-2 and the F-117 in November of '89. This is '88, excuse me. There's John Lear. And John and I were heading up US 95, heading to the town of Tonopah. And we're just north of Scotty's Junction, and an F-117 it's at about 1,500 feet. It was, cut across about 45-degree angle from the road. And I about crashed the car because, we'd seen one cruddy backlit photo of it, and they used a telephoto lens. So it squashed it compressed the length of the aircraft. And so we grabbed a quick bite in Tonopah. Then we got on US 6, headed east, 14 miles, with a big huge sign that says Tonopah Test Range. So we headed south on that road. It goes 18 miles, and you come to the main gate of TTR, as they call it. So we just drove along the north fence line, and you could see the whole base from the fence line. And we were just waiting. I said, "Well, my God, I wonder if we're going to really see something." Now I had a film camera. I had a Nikon, but it was for print film or a slide film. This is before digital cameras. And I'm that old, yes. and we're sitting there, and I look to the north, and I see a black dot with a small light at the bottom of it, and then a small white dot with a small light. So I figured that was the F-117 and a chase, and that's what it was. Now I have 36 exposures in my camera. Unlike today's, you can shoot off 2,000 photos of one thing and not worry about running out of film. So as it's coming closer, I have a real good telephoto lens, the best the money could buy at the time, and I'm sitting there. And all of a sudden, I get a good view of the F-117. I mean, it's coming right up to us. And I was like a 10 or 11-year-old boy that's seeing a naked woman for the first time. My whole body was just vibrating. It was trembling. And I went through all 36 exposures. I said, now we got to get back to Las Vegas and get this stuff processed. And back in the day, there used to be things called photomats. Now, you have to be old to remember that, because I don't think they've been around for 40 years now.
I do remember photomats, so yes, yeah, I'm getting there.
what took their place were coffee baristas in parking lots. That's where you used to drop your film off and pick it up the next day. So we stopped the Little Alien for dinner, a quick bite, and then we headed back to Las Vegas. We got in about 10 after 10 or 10 after 9 on that night, and I knew all the photomats were closed, and I was just anxious and disappointed that I had to wait another 24 to 48 hours to get the film processed. And John Weir told me, he said, "Hey, I got a new friend just moving here from Albuquerque. He's in a job in the desert." I said, "Okay." And about 10 minutes later, a knock on the door. John answers the door, and in comes a very nice young man, introduced himself, and my name is Bob Lazar. And and Bob Lazar is the one everybody knows about. Bob Lazar, that's Bob Lazar. So I told him, we were talking, airplanes and stuff, and then I told him what my dilemma was. I said, I have print film of the F-117, and I'm the first civilian to photograph it. And I got to wait another 36 to 48 hours to see if any of my images came out unblurred. So he said, "Well, I have a C-41 processing unit at home." Now, John Lear at the time lived near Sunrise Ridge, which is the northeast part of Las Vegas, and Bob lived off of West Charleston on the other side of town. So he said, "Well, let's you get the film on you?" And I said, "Yeah." So let's jump in my car and let's get it processed and printed. I said, "Let's go." So we jump in the car, and we're not more than a block from Lear's place. And Bob looks at me, he says, "I feel sorry for that dumb son of a bitch, Lear." I said, "What do you mean you feel sorry for him?" I said, "He's from this world famous aviation family. I mean, his dad brought Learjet to the world, not counting the other 100 or so things that he designed and developed."
Right.
And he said, and he believes in UFOs. He said, "My God," he said, "I'm a nuclear physicist. If I can't prove it mathematically or put my hands on it, it doesn't exist." I said, "And you couldn't put a gun to my head to convince me that UFOs were real." Well, fast forward another, 13 or 14 months, there's a silhouetted guy talking to George Knapp, who I've known forever, talking about doing reverse engineering on alien spacecraft at a place called S4. And that's probably my claim to fame when it comes to things that go bump in the night, is the fact that, I know Lazar, and I knew him before, and you couldn't convince him that UFOs were real back then.
Well,
one thing led to another. Go on.
No, I was just gonna say, how do you feel when you hear, like Bob Lazar and where where the mindset of not believing in, UFOs or anything like that, and then all of a sudden he's now a big believer and someone that's out in the forefront, giving his opinion on it. When was your turning point? When did you start believing in UFOs?
Oh, maybe 50 years ago.
So you're a young man then.
Younger than I am now, yeah.
I thought you were 20-something now. So
no, I wouldn't want to be 20-something today.
Hell, me
I would
either.
not. No, when I was 20, there were things that I did that if I did them today, I would be executed on the spot. I would probably be drawn and quartered, and then they would burn my remains and pour salt all over the gravesite, the unmarked gravesite. Oh, I see him. There's Darcy.
We have Darcy.
So, So I just, I just love doing this. I'm retired now. I've been retired for, shit, it's gonna be 10 years pretty soon.
Wow.
I enjoy the people I know and I've met in this particular community. I feel comfortable with them. I feel they're my people, if you want to call it that. So that's basically where what brought me to this point in my life.
Well, like I said,
And my favorite thing is to challenge our government.
well, I think the government always needs to be challenged by its people, no matter who and where you are. But some people don't believe that. But well, let's introduce Darcy. We've already gave him the amazing intro. Darcy, welcome back to Truth Be Told.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Of course.
I know I'm super late to the party, but I'm happy to be here. I like to arrive fashionably late, apparently.
Right.
I just got off the phone with Tyler Glockner. I was just talking with him about some research I'm doing for a different doc, but I got lost in conversation and I was like, oh crap, I'm totally missing Tony Sweet's.
Well, Jim has been doing a great job.
We were able to fill the time.
Yeah, Jim. With Jim, I don't think there's no time that's not going to be filled, because his knowledge and of this field is just, it's like a library, and I love it. Well, Darcy, tell me this: what was it about Jim that you wanted to be a part of this, amazing documentary, this secret space program?
Well, thanks, Tony, for that.
Yeah.
I wanted to produce a piece that spoke to the history of the military's involvement in the aviation industry, and how we have embarked on a mission to produce the best technology in airspace, and possibly outer space. And when I say we, I mean like the United States. I'm Canadian, so I'm definitely a faker there. Can't say I'm American, but I think there's so much proof historically that we have had an amazing technical prowess,
right,
in terms of aerospace technology. And who better to go to and talk to about this history of things in airspace than the good man Jim Goodall himself.
Right.
So, I reached out to him because I was actually trying to get in touch with Michael Schratt about having him involved in this feature. And he said, he talked about it with me, and then he said, you probably should talk to Jim Goodall. He knows a lot, and he can talk to you about this stuff. Michael Schratt currently can't talk about this stuff. He has a lot in the past, but he can't now. And so he kind of said, no, I can't talk about it, but this man can. He introduced me to Jim. We got to talking. I showed him actually a different documentary that I made that's kind of along the same line as this TR3B one. It's called Secret Space UFOs Part 1, and it's just about Apollo and Gemini and the Project Mercury and all these early space and exploration endeavors by NASA, and how we've found and tracked all kinds of UFOs in and around our planet in outer space. And he liked the documentary when I sent it to him. And I said, well, I'm thinking about doing this other thing. Do you want to get involved? And he said, yeah, sure, I'll do it. And I flew out to Tucson and stayed with Rosemary and Jim for a couple nights, and we hung out. We shot the interviews. We went to a local airspace museum and ate at Denny's a couple times. And we just hit it off. We both love a little marijuana every now and then. So
medical purposes, I'm sure. Yes. Of
course. Only medical purposes. Same reason I drink beer is medical purposes.
Right.
And yeah, it was just we've got a friendship, we've got a bond, and we've got an interest in UFOs and the history. And I think what he likes about my approach to this research field is that I'm fairly grounded, and I try to look at more accurate information that's out there. I'm not trying to sensationalize anything or stand on a milk crate and say I know anything more than others, but I'm trying to do accurate speculation with the best facts that we have at hand, you know?
Right. And, you know, what I said in the intro, when we hear about secret space programs, and we were talking, Jim and I were talking about like Area 51 and, you know, how it became so commercialized and how we've made it such a pop culture, has the government moved its facility because it's gotten so much eyes on it. But when we hear about the secret space program, what does that mean? Does that mean, because we're going to Mars now, and private companies are, building rockets and going into space. What's so secret that they need to keep something from us? Could one of you explain what that means and what that is?
I can just start off by saying that, there's different interpretations of secret space. Some people believe, recently there's been stories told about, very factual stories about missions to the moon, secret missions to the moon, and, secret bird type races that have been interfacing, and, folks that say that they've done missions on Mars with Barack Obama, and then they've been age regressed and their soul has been put into a young child body or something, along these lines. And that really has stolen the show, in my opinion, of a secret space theory. But to be clear, the most accurate representation of what secret space is just the fact that there's things happening in space that are possibly being conducted by our intelligence agencies, our defense agencies around the world, that are being carried out clandestinely and kept from the public for probably national defense reasons, but also to protect the public from going crazy. And NASA did the Brookings report, right? They worked with the Brookings Institute back in 1960, and they published this report. And the collaboration between this think tank and NASA concluded that if there was ever a chance of finding something so groundbreaking as an extraterrestrial race out there in space that's trying to interface with us, or we had advanced our technology to the point of using thermonuclear engines and rocketry, which we know had been carried out with the Dyson project back in the 1950s. That was a nuclear rocket project. These things have to be kept from the public. That's what the Brookings report illustrated. It said that the masses can't know about this. We need to figure out a way to classify this information and keep it from the public. And I think this foundational research project allowed, for the military industrial complex to work hand in hand with our space agencies to keep things secret from the public, to protect the economy, to protect our ideological thought systems, and, keep religion from falling apart, institutions that keep us working in a certain paradigm or pattern of life. And, you mentioned going to Mars and trying to colonize Mars and maybe setting up a moon base. These things would be done through third parties, right? But if you look at Elon Musk's recent contract with the Pentagon, with the Department of Defense, that would illustrate that anything he does, he has to do by their rules. And that would mean if he finds something out in space, or if he tries to do something out in space that they don't agree with, they can shut him down, right? That's just the way it works. It's not his sandbox. It's their sandbox.
That
He's
doesn't
just
make
trying to-
sense. It just does not make sense to say, you know, space is our playground and you have to abide by our rules when, I mean, it's not like you can draw a boundary and say this.
Well, the military can draw a boundary with
Of
just
course.
airspace.
Right.
You know, the military can say, you know, if you're going to try and launch a rocket up, this airspace is owned by us.
Right.
Literally, they can do that. So anything between that and space is theirs. And space, quite frankly, is the ultimate frontier, the new frontier
Right.
for a defense agency to occupy and to own and to control. And, you know, we talked to Richard Dolan in the documentary, and he quite well illustrates that the militaries of the world would know quite early in our history, we better be first to this we better be first to conquer this theater of operations before our enemies or before our competition. And I think that's the one thing people have to keep in mind. Secret space theory also involves, obviously, UFOs and aliens and megalithic structures on the moon or Mars or Phobos, or anomalies in space that can't be explained. And I'm very interested in that stuff because, it goes without saying, if you look up in space, you wonder if there's someone up there looking up at the same time, wondering, are we alone?
Right.
Are we the only intelligence out there? And when you start to research all of these anomalies in history, these UFO incidents that have happened in history, and then you look at what the military's done and how they've been involved with supposedly occupying space, then you can put these two things together and realize there's lots of secrecy here, and we're probably not getting the whole picture.
Well, I'm gonna show you this. I hope you can see this in my screen. I found this today. It was actually a Newsweek article that was published January 26th. I don't know if you can't see it. It's not gonna focus in. But what it says NASA has found over 5,000 potential alien worlds, and here are some of the weirdest. But I mean, that headline alone caught my eye, of course, of what we're actually interviewing today about secret space programs. And Darcy, Jim, I mean, when you hear NASA putting out potential, articles like that, what does that come to your mind, especially when it comes to like the secret space program? Jim, what do you think?
I'd like to answer that. For a couple of years, I was a docent up at Kitt Peak National Observatories. And those that aren't familiar with Kitt Peak, it is the largest collection of optical telescopes in the world. They have 22 optical telescopes at Kitt Peak. It's about 50 miles due west of Tucson. It's managed by the University of Arizona and the National Optical Astronomy Observatories, which is also based at the U of A. But they have everything from a 12-inch primary mirror to a 13-foot primary mirror on the Mayhall telescope. But the 2.1 meter, Caltech used it for 5 years, looking at a very small, just a postage stamp size area of our galaxy. They were doing, they had adaptive optics, which would adjust the optics 1,200 times a second to eliminate distortion because of air currents and heat and whatever.
Right.
And they because they were the resolution of the mirror was almost as good as Hubble. Over the course of 5 years, they cataloged 8,000 exoplanets. But that's just a drop in the bucket. Just before I left Kitt Peak, I had to get knee replacement, so I couldn't walk very much, and it's also at 7,000 feet.
Right.
But we had a gathering of all the astronomers, all the technicians, the men and women that that really keep the telescopes going, and all the docents. And it was one of the top guys from National Science Foundation. A exoplanet conference where every astronomer and every telescope group that was looking for exoplanets met at this one location. And the result of the gathering was based on the best mathematical formulas that are proven. They calculate for every star in the universe, and that's a number you can't cram in your head. There is 1.5 planets. And out of that incredible number, they calculate there are 2 billion, and that's with a B, 2 billion Earth-like planets orbiting a similar sized brown dwarf star as our sun in the inhabitable zone with liquid water. And if we're the only ones, what a waste of space. And that's to quote Jodie Foster's character in Contact.
Well,
so
yeah, right.
We're not alone. We're not alone by any stretch of the imagination. They're out there. I looked at there was a piece that someone sent me yesterday. I looked at, and it was Buzz Aldrin. He said, we saw them. They were observing us when we were on the moon. A couple of the other Apollo astronauts basically said the same thing. And I think one of the main reasons why we're not divulging that information, or our government, is maybe we're not in charge. It may be they, or whoever they may be, are the ones that are controlling the dissemination. As an Israeli military specialist and someone who specializes in things that go bump in the night said recently that the main reason why we're not being told is because we're not ready for it. We will not be able to accept. You and I will.
Right.
And most of the first world will. But the majority of the world is not first world. The majority of the world isn't. And if all of a sudden, people who, are very, religious groups, if all of a sudden they realize that maybe Jesus, maybe Muhammad, maybe Buddha, Adam Smith, they may have all been aliens. And when you look at Greek mythology, you start looking at them and you put it into a modern context.
Right.
I mean, thunderbolts coming from the sky, that could be a phaser. So I believe that most of the world isn't ready for it, because the glue that holds civilization together is a firm belief in a supreme being. And if all of a sudden that supreme being turns out to be, little, alien being, gray or whatever color it may be,
right,
I don't think the majority of the world's willing to accept that.
Well, let me ask you this. So we have NASA. That's what we know as our space program, and that's until Elon Musk and Branson and all these other people getting involved, Bezos. But is NASA more? I'm going to use an analogy like a massage parlor that is a front for a drug cartel or a mob. Is it kind of just a front or a face of a space program that's just kind of gives us little bits and pieces, where what really is going on out there is the secret space program that we don't really know or heard of?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of evidence to that. I think that if people do enough research into that accusation, they'll find that not only have multiple astronauts come forward that have retired in the past and said, there's things going on out there that the public don't really understand or wouldn't know, or sort of cryptic speeches by Neil Armstrong, where he says, the protective layers of truth, and it's up to the youth that are coming up to try and reveal those protective layers and such. So there's just lots of little things that have happened in the past that prove really NASA is the nerd center for the military industrial complex. It's where the best and brightest can go and do space research, but you're at the behest of the military, and
Right.
nothing that you would discover is going to be released to the public unless it's allowed to be. And there's all kinds of evidence. For example, you have not just like Apollo, Gemini, or Mercury missions revealing UFO objects,
Right.
pacing craft or going around. We have transcripts from Apollo 8 and all of these different early Apollo missions where the astronauts are talking about things they're seeing and hearing on the dark side of the moon. And those transcripts have been declassified and released to the public, but NASA didn't release that and go to some press agency and say, hey, look what the astronauts were talking about when they were on the dark side of the moon. And it's funny, you know that the astronauts are somewhat read into keeping what they say on unencrypted channels, meaning public channels, censored.
Mm-hmm.
Because, for example, the famous noise from the music from the dark side of the moon,
Right.
That happened in the Apollo 8 mission. And when the astronauts were talking, that was all recorded by what's kind of like a flight recorder, like a black box system that we would find on any commercial flight these days. They had that in the Apollo capsule.
Mm-hmm.
And those transcripts got released because those recordings were then transcribed when people got back and so on and so forth. So that's in the public. But when the astronauts actually connected up with the radio signal to speak with Capcom, they completely dropped the conversation with Houston, talking about what they were hearing and experiencing whenever they were on the far side of the moon, which was this crazy music. So, and then Dr. Jack Kasher, I interviewed him. He worked for NASA, and he did a lot of research with Donald Ratch, who was an amateur NASA investigator that was basically monitoring all the missions, the STS missions and such in recent years. And every time he recorded the STS missions, either audio or video, when they used to do the NASA downlinks on NASA TV, he would isolate sound bites where it seemed like they were speaking in cryptic code about things that were happening out there that the astronauts were seeing or observing. And a couple times Donald Ratch caught them speaking just bluntly about either we have an unidentified flying object, the alien spacecraft is now under observance. And, the first accusation was made by Catherine, her name escapes me, can't remember her name, but that was an STS mission. And the we have the alien spacecraft under observance was astronaut John E. Blaha, and they're very clever in how they cover this stuff up. A lot of researchers say that they'll say we have a fire. That is a code for there's a UFO. Because if you heard an astronaut say we have a fire, and then Don Ratch is hearing this and he's running to the screen to see what's going on on the video, or listening after that, like to hear of Capcom saying, hey, like for Houston, like why, like where's the fire? Are you trying to extinguish it? Yada yada. None of that kind of conversation is happening. Instead, you hear that line and then communication kind of drops out after that, meaning that quite often they're probably switching to a encrypted voice channel that is not public. And we know that since the Apollo moon missions, they have had an encrypted channel, and we have, even in the first documentary, Secret Space UFOs Part 1, we show where they're talking to the astronauts, Capcom are, and they say, can you switch over to the other channel so that the TV people don't hear or see what we're talking about right now? So we know that even back then they had a private radio channel for communicating stuff that they didn't want the public to know, and that would have been a military-run encrypted channel. The same thing has happened with all of the NASA space missions with the STS. And, with this documentary, we're hypothesizing that there's probably secret spacecraft that we're owning and operating and running into space. The TR-3B mainly is what we're hypothesizing, but we know that the Air Force has the X-37B, and that's an autonomous STS. It looks like a Columbia or Atlantis shuttle, but it doesn't have any crew. And what can you do with that? And what do we know that the X-37B has actually done? We know very, very little. Has it gone to the moon? We don't know. It's an Air Force-run vehicle, and we're not privy to that information. It is literally a classified, that's a classified spacecraft. Do we have other things like the infamous TR-3B? Well, there's been thousands and thousands and thousands of eyewitness accounts of craft that have been flying in our airspace and outer space that look like black triangles. And I think Tyler Glockner has done a really good job with his YouTube channel cataloging lots of these black triangles that have been flying around in space. He's a secret space enthusiast. I think he really loves outer space anomalies. And Jim has had a deep history and education in black budget spy aircrafts, and he worked on the telemetry systems for the A-12 Blackbird. That's the CIA version of the SR-71. He is a Skunk Works historian. He knows Lockheed very dearly, and he was great friends with Ben Rich, the former president of Lockheed Skunk Works, who inherited that role after Kelly Johnson had moved on. So, and Ben Rich made some pretty shocking revelations or accusations to the public. And I think he was one of these guys that was kind of like, he wanted the world to know a bit more about what mankind is really up to and what is possible in the theater of airspace and possibly outer space. But he only hinted at it. He didn't give exact evidence, but those hints that he gave could be very linked to things like these black triangles that can fly silently over neighborhoods and then fly up into space, and possibly spy on our adversaries and so on and so forth. And maybe these alien reproduction vehicles, our attempts at creating something as sophisticated as what Bob Lazar said he tried to reverse engineer, maybe our ARVs are black triangles. And I like that hypothesis, and that's why I wanted to make this documentary.
Well, and I'm going to ask you both this, and Jim, you might be able to answer this pretty good question here of the technology. You know, a lot of people are like, okay, is it just human beings from the future coming back to us to, you know, watch over us, make sure we don't hurt ourselves or destroy our planet or whatever. So that's one. But in the secret space program, is it crashed technology that we retrieved, or do you think it's UFOs that have landed and said, you know, become allies or whatever, controlled us and saying, here, I'm going to give you, it's like the dad buying you an old piece of crap, you know, when you're a teenager to learn, and then I'll buy you a better car as you get more experience. So what do you think this technology, where did it come from?
Well, I'd like to answer, there's three parts to that. June of 1986, John Andrews, who was the kit developer for testers, he actually came out with the Bob Lazar sports model UFO kit. He wrote a letter. He was a good friend of Ben Rich, much like myself, and he sent a letter to Ben. Again, this is in June of '86. He said, Ben, it said, do you and Kelly, referring to Kelly Johnson, believe in UFOs? Now we have two categories, both man-made and extraterrestrial. And in the same week that he mailed a letter, he mailed it like on a Monday, he had a response on Thursday from Ben Rich on his corporate letterhead as president of the Lockheed Skunk Works. It said, Dear John, both Kelly and I are firm believers in both categories. We refer to ours as unfunded opportunities, and he underlines the U, the F, and the O. Now, if you didn't fund something, if you didn't have to go to Congress and said, hey, I need X number of billions or trillions of dollars for this UFO, this flying saucer project, you probably wouldn't get it. But he said, watch out, there's people out there that will lead you astray and do you harm. The other thing is, shortly after Ben retired from the Skunk Works, where he could speak more freely, he was at UCLA at a aeronautical graduate student of the aeronautical department, and he was the keynote speaker. And in his conversation, in his talk, he said that we have the ability today to send ET home, but our government released the information. That's a pretty amazing statement when you think about it. We have the ability to send ET home. That means we can go intergalactic. We can go from here to the other side of the universe.
Right.
The other thing is just before he passed away, I called Ben, and we spoke quarterly for 25 years. And if I didn't call him, he called me. And I called him. He was at USC Medical Center. He was dying of esophageal cancer, and we were talking about my friend John Andrews and and he had a lot of admiration for John. He said, Jim, we have things out in the desert, and he's saying this directly to me. We have things out in the desert, and he wasn't referring to Area 51. That's 50 years beyond what you can comprehend. And if you've seen movies like Star Trek or Star Wars, we've been there, done that, or decided it wasn't worth the effort. I said, Ben, you want to expand upon that? And typical Ben Rich fashion, he said, no. And then he had the nerve to die on me about 10 days later. And
oh man,
I really miss that,
yeah,
that connection with the Skunk Works.
Yeah, and so Darcy, when you, like you said, when you start diving into the secret space program, and you know, some people probably, I guess nowadays there's so much on the internet, I think it kind of dilutes of what 15, 20 years ago, when people start touching on subjects to where your eyes start popping towards you, and like they're like the government's starting to wag their finger. But I think because of the social media now, so much gets out there, it gets diluted. But do you think that with people like yourself putting documentaries together and bringing up, you know, space programs that most people don't even want us to talk about, do you think you get put on a list of people to watch, or do you think it's kind of been diluted because of social media now?
Yeah, I think the latter. You know, I think that the greatest thing that's going to get you in trouble, get you on a list, is what you can prove.
Right.
And
Right.
I'm putting out theories. I'm putting out information that seems to have a lot of possibilities of proof behind it. I think if I had I don't know, a real concrete piece of paper that proved that the
Right.
TR3B was real, that proved that we're working with some off-world extraterrestrial intelligent race operating space missions out there, you know, around our planet and such. If I could prove that, then I probably would be in trouble. But I can't 100% prove that.
So yeah, you feel more
a lot,
comfortable.
a lot of these, yeah, a lot of these, it's, you know, we're trying to make accurate speculation based on what we know to be true. So we know that the first, like, vector shaped aircraft, a flying wing that operated on rocket engines, jet fuel, was in 1948, was the YB-49, right? And that came out of Northrop Grumman. And we know that there's been all kinds of advancements in our technology since then. We know that there's the B-2 bomber, the Have Blue project. Some people thought the Mac Air was a thing. Then we hear about, you know, we know the F-117 stealth fighter worked, and we know that Northrop Grumman produced the TR-3A, you know, and the TR-3A was featured in a Popular Mechanics magazine, and this was supposedly an aid to the F-117 and the bombers. They were trying to create a laser targeting system that could operate at stealth heights, and it was one of these craft that looked a lot like what the TR-3B eventually was supposedly built around looking like. And we know that the A-12 Blackbird is the fastest aircraft in history still, you know, and that supposedly was decommissioned in 1968. Was that when it was decommissioned, Jim?
Yeah, June of '68 was the last flight, and it was retired for 20 years before the existence of the A-12, which is Oxcart, and that's what I worked on the A-12 Blackbird.
So what I'm trying to say is, you know, if you only find out about this craft in 1988, and the government wants to admit to something that's archaic in technology compared to what we have now. The Russians have a flying delta-shaped craft. You can look it up. It's a flying triangle that's an autonomous aircraft. And then you have the X47B, and that
Yep.
is that's an autonomous Air Force flying triangle that it doesn't have anti-gravitic technology, but we know that there's a drone out there that can fly around in our airspace autonomously that looks like a black triangle. These are running on jet fuel, What the TR-3B supposedly worked on was anti-gravitic technology, and it was our crude attempt at trying to mimic what we were seeing with the propulsion system of something like, Bob Lazar's sports model.
Right.
And what do you have with the sports model? You have a anti-gravitic engine in the center of the craft, and then you have 3 pylons that surround that apparently gave it thrust and propulsion into different directions. And then you look at the TR-3B, you have an anti-gravitic superconductor engine in the middle that apparently was massive, and it was a mercury-based supercooled rotating superconductor. And then you have 3 thrusters on each corner. And those thrusters supposedly used hydrogen. But this was a crude attempt. It's like seeing something amazing and being like, okay, guys, what do we got in the garage? Let's try and make something cool.
Right.
And I'm probably, that's a pretty patronizing and rude way of saying it, I guess, because Jim would know firsthand that there's a lot of really intelligent engineers and designers and all that stuff behind the A-12 Blackbird. Would he say that we probably have anti-gravitic technology out there? I think I'll let him speak to that himself, but can we prove it? No.
Yeah.
And our relationship with possible alien cultures and alien technology, again, I don't think the world's ready for it. The feeling is that if we were to release the information, people would go absolutely. I think they would riot. So they just have to keep that close to their chest. As far as anything that you see that the government releases, this is state of the art stuff, it's probably been retired for 20 years. I mean, when they admitted the existence of the Lockheed A-12 Blackbird, that was the CIA version, single place Blackbird versus a 2-place SR-71. That airplane had been retired and in storage at Palmdale at Site 2 at Air Force Plant 42 for 20 years. It retired in 68, and in 88 they admitted the existence of it. And that airplane flew straight and level at 92,500. Bill Park zoomed one to 96,000 feet. This is a manned operational air-breathing airplane. And he's gone the airplane's designed to fly right around Mach 3.3, which is like 2,200 miles an hour. But in a few isolated incidents during flight test and purely by accident, they went as fast as 2,391 miles an hour over 50 years ago.
Wow.
I mean, just think about that.
Pretty damn fast.
And that's and the Blackbirds retired. They retired that the last one was in 99. And was flying with NASA. So it's been 23 years. And that was a museum piece when they retired it. So what are we flying today? I just got to go back to what Ben said. We have the ability to take ET home. And we have things that if you've seen it in movies like Star Trek or Star Wars, we've been there, done that, or decided it wasn't worth the effort. So the rise of the TR-3B, the the X-37B, the things that go bump in the night. Those are, you know, those head. And one other thing, I had a gentleman who was a retired Lieutenant Colonel, Dave Fruhoff, SR-71 pilot. In 1972, 73 timeframe, he was in a night training mission on the far Western Pacific. He was flying an SR-71. He was at 78,000 feet, about Mach 2.7. And that's sort of a sweet spot for the airplane. It doesn't overstress the airframe, you know, thermally.
Right.
Because you get up to Mach 3.2, the airplane starts heating up due to friction.
I'm sure, yeah.
But it was 11 o'clock at night, 3/4 moon off to his left side of the airplane. And off to the far right side, he gets a glint of something metallic, 5 or 6 miles away, maybe 6,000 or 7,000 feet above him. And he thought maybe it was another blackbird. But he said it had a reflective surface. It had edges to it, so it wasn't a flying saucer type object. It was a different type of craft. So he called Skadina, Okinawa. That's where Det 1 for the SR-71s were operating out of, to see if we had another bird up. And they said, "Well, you were at the briefing." He said, "No, you're up there by yourself." He said, "No, I have company. I'm going to take a look." So he advances the throttles because at Mach 2.7 at 7,000 feet, you're a minimum burner. You're just cruising and very, very fuel efficient at that speed. So he advances the throttles. He does about a 10-degree bank as he's climbing, so he's keep his eye on the object. His back seater gets on the horn and say, "Hey, Dave," says, "we have company." I said, "Yeah, I'm gonna go take a look." He said when they were about still a couple thousand feet below it and still a mile or so away from it, this thing took off and left him in the dust. And he figured it on an angle of about a 30-degree angle of attack. He figured the speed that it left the area was somewhere in the neighborhood of 8,000 to 10,000 miles an hour. So that was the end of 72 or early 73. So fast forward to 1980, he retires. Dave retires. He has a real high security clearance, so he's looking for a job. He ends up sort of through the back door getting a job as facility manager at Area 51. And, you know, so he got there. He didn't want to, you don't ask a lot of questions, especially if you're the new guy on the block, because you'll get your butt thrown out. But he knew most everybody anyway. But after he was there about a year, started asking around, "Do we have something that can outrun the blackbird?" And everybody there said, "No, not here." So what did he have? And because he was responsible for all facilities above and underground, wow. I asked him, I said, "Dave, what about the underground facilities at Area 51? He said if there would have been any at Area 51, I would have been responsible for them, but there aren't any there. It doesn't mean that there aren't underground facilities, because they have the ability over the Nevada test site to go drill a hole, 36-foot diameter hole through solid granite at about a foot an hour. Damn. And that's, they built Yucca Mountain that way, low-grade nuclear storage site, which they've never used. And they when they dig in the holes down 1,500 feet for the underground nuclear detonation. So that technology exists. But he said it wasn't at Area 51. And then he said he did ask, he was only there 5 years, but he did ask around the guys that flew during the time that Bob Lazar was at S4. I said, "Do any of you remember a guy named Bob Lazar?" And a couple of people says, "Yeah, I know, I talked to him, or I remember seeing his name on the manifest or something like that." So there's a lot of speculation, to prove that Bob was telling the truth. And probably the biggest one, I was at the Pentagon during Desert Shield and Desert Storm. I was a Air Force historian. And in my back pocket, I had, the whole time I was there, I had Bob Lazar's W-2 that he was paid on when he worked at S4. I blocked out his social security number, and I had a down day, and I'm looking through the Pentagon directory of the organization, the Navy organization that paid Bob Lazar, and there was no such animal in the directory. So I went to one that was the closest, and I wander over to that office, and the door was open. I go in there, and there's a young Lieutenant JG behind the counter. Now, at the time, I am a tech sergeant. I'm in uniform. I hand the Lieutenant JG my Bob's W-2. He looks at it and he says, "Excuse me for a minute." He gets up and he goes into the 2 stars office. Now, this is a Navy office. Comes out after about 15 or 20 seconds. He said, "The Admiral will see you now." Now, anybody that's been in the military, especially the Navy or the Marine Corps, they know that no flag officer, admiral in the United States Navy is going to talk to an Air Force enlisted puke unless his life was in danger or something. So I go in there, I give him a real sharp salute, and he says, "Parade rest." Normally they would say "at ease," and you just sort of stand there, but I'm rigid. I'm in a parade rest position. And he has Bob's W-2 in his hand, and he said, "Sergeant, I don't know where you got this, but if I ever see your face cross the threshold of my office again, you'll be the most sorriest son of a bitch in the United States military. Do you understand me, Sergeant?" I said, "Yes, sir." And with that, he puts Bob's W-2 in the shredder.
Oh my God.
Now, if Bob was a fraud, if Bob was bogus, first of all, I would not have had that interaction with that 2-star.
No,
and he would not have thrown Bob's W-2 in the shredder.
Oh my God. Well, I mean, the time is getting away from us, and I don't want to keep you guys on, but I do want to ask a couple questions from my co-host. I call them the chat room people. They're my co-host, and then I'll let you guys go. And so the first question is from Renee. Renee's one of our regulars. But did James Goodall see the 9 UFO craft that Bob Lazar claimed he saw depicted on History Channel? So, Jim, I'm sure that's for you.
No, Bob told me about it, and he said the only reason he knew there were 9 because one of the first times he went in there, all the doors interconnecting the 9 bays were open, and his was the first one in there, and he referred to his as a sports model. So no, I've never seen a UFO. I've seen things I couldn't explain, but it turns out they weren't UFOs. So, but if it's in the area, you can't identify it. It's an unknown aerial phenomena or unidentified flying object. But Bob is real, in my opinion.
Okay, so I don't know how to pronounce this, but Gidon in the chat room says, "Can you ask your guest what their thoughts are on is it Amuamua? Amuamua? Is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah, Amuamua. It's a Hawaiian sounding name.
And if they think that it could be a spacecraft observing, what's your thoughts on that?
Well, what I gather from Avi Loeb's research on that object is that it did things that a traditional comet or asteroid would not do. For example, it sped up and it changed its direction at times that it was flying around our solar system that an asteroid or a comet would not be able to do. So that was the first sort of like anomalous data that came from that. And it's funny enough that I'm actually working on a documentary that's related to this question.
Oh wow, that's a good tie-in.
Yeah. And it turns out there are many more objects that have entered our solar system that are like Oumuamua. And if you listen to Avi Loeb's lectures, he tries to illustrate that. He tries to say, we only have access to certain data. that comes from academic satellites and space telescopes and stuff, right? And that data that he's referring to are academic, sort of institutional research infrastructure. But there's other infrastructure that's out there in space that is monitoring things coming in and out of our solar system that are not operated by the mainstream research institutions. So I think Oumuamua definitely exhibited behavior that is not your typical, space object, easily explainable. The one thing that he did explain about it, though, is that it was tumbling. And like, I think I'm going to try and interview Avi. I'm curious.
That would be a great one. I would love to see that.
What the tumbling really means. Like, does this mean that it's a big rock that was spinning like a, kind of a helicopter propeller, but like in a trajectory towards our sun and then around and back out of the solar system? Or was it on its side, right. and did our radar and tracking infrastructure interpret something that's sort of rotating or spinning to be, flipping,
right.
And is it something to do with our tracking technology that would interpret it as tumbling,
right,
rather than, was it kind of like moving a certain way?
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. To, like you said, the speed, the directions, and all that stuff. That doesn't normally occur without some kind of force. Jim, what do you think about that?
Well, again, I'm going to go back to talking about Kitt Peak. They have two 2.1 meter telescopes are dedicated to star search, not star search, but their task, and it's tasked by graduate students from the University of Arizona School of Astronomy. Their only job is to keep track of 8,000 to 9,000 known Earth orbit crossing objects. So they're constantly looking and tracking, and it could have been some of their work that found this this object coming in, and again, it's not going on a trajectory that would believe it's just an innate object that is traveling through the solar system or through the universe. It changed directions, and that means that something made it was it, and how plan, and yet right now we can't.
We lost you there
Makes sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. We lost you right at the end, but everything you said made sense. But well, gentlemen, like I said, I don't want to keep you. We'll have to have you back because there's so many questions. There's a lot more questions in the chat room. I had more questions, but secret space programs always bring up everybody's interest. And Darcy, where can people watch Secret Space UFOs: Rise of the TR-3B?
Sure. People can check it out on Amazon Prime, iTunes, YouTube Red, Google Play, and I think Vudu, to name a few.
Nice.
Yep. And if they want to check out some of my other films and trailers and posters and stuff like that, they can just head to my website. I've got a bit of a blog there too that I've started. My website is occultjourneys.com. Don't be scared of occult. I'm not part of a secret society or something. Occult is just the English translation of occulta, which is Latin for hidden. Okay? All right.
Sure. No, I was kidding. But where do people follow you, find you? Do you have like a Instagram, anything like that?
I'm just Darcy Weir on Facebook and Instagram, and I've got a Twitter that is Occult Journeys.
Oh, nice.
But yeah, I'm just regular old me.
Regular OU. Well, Jim,
Yep.
the historian, tell us where people can find you and follow you and all that good stuff.
Well, I am cursed to be on Facebook, Jim Goodall. I'm not on any other platform, but my books, I have authored 29 books, all on spooky airplanes, things that go bump in the night, and submarines. And they can be found at, you go into Amazon, James C. Goodall, Goodall, books by James C. Goodall, and they should show up. And if they don't, you can go at 75 Years of Lucky Skunk Works. That's titled one of my books, and a pictorial history of the SR-71 Blackbird is probably those two books are the treasures of Jeff Babbion, the vice president, general manager of the Skunk Works. He said, no one's allowed to touch him down in his man cave. And that just tickles the heck out of me.
Right, right. Well, I thank you guys, and we all thank you for being on the show. It's thank you for coming back, sharing your knowledge and your wisdom and your work. I know it takes a lot to put together, the years that, Jim, you have put together, and Darcy, the projects you put together. I know it takes a lot of time and effort to do that. And we want to thank everybody for tuning in and being in the chat room, asking tons of questions and just chitter-chattering. We love that. And please like, share, and subscribe to the channel and support Darcy and Jim and any of their efforts going forward. And again, thank you guys. And until go ahead.
And Tony, I look forward to the next time.
Of course.
And this hopefully I'll have my internet connection speeded up.
Right.
And I won't be so. It said internet's unstable. Well, maybe they're talking about me. But
I every time I see that, I do agree with it on me. I'm like, yeah, I'm not quite stable yet, but like maybe I'll need one of the hits of what you guys are doing. Maybe that'll make me stable a little bit more. But until next,
relax.
Right. Until next time, please subscribe, share, and this show and all of our shows on Truth Be Told. Mondays, you have me or Robert Hensley doing the Minuteman Report. Wednesdays at 3 o'clock with Bonnie Burkert. And, of course, me every Friday right here on the Truth Be Told radio TV channel on YouTube and Twitter and Facebook. But until next time, I'm Tony Sweet. And we'll see you soon. Bye. This has been another episode of Truth Be Told. Thank you so much for watching. Recorded live at UBN Go Studios in Burbank, California. Join us on social media. Facebook, Truth Be Told Radio. Instagram, Truth Be Told Paranormal. Go to Truth Be Told Worldwide for more information on upcoming shows.